Welcome back to Legitimate Targets, everybody. I hope you're all having a great day. There is so much violence and bloodshed that we are witnessing each and every day in Gaza and also in the West Bank more and more that many are wondering, why is nobody doing anything? Well, fortunately, there are some people who are trying to hold the criminals accountable for this genocide that is taking place. And that is being done at the International Criminal Court as well as at the International Court of Justice. So joining me today to discuss what is going on and how these processes work and how they are developing is Tristino Marniello, who is a professor of law at Liverpool John Moores University and a member of the legal team who's actually representing Gaza victims before the International Criminal Court. He specializes in criminal law and human rights. So how you doing today, Mr. Marniello? Thank you so much for joining me.
Many thanks for the invitation today, Jackson.
Of course, it's a great honor to speak with you. And, something that I don't even fully understand is, why are there two courts, the ICJ and the ICC, and how do they differ? And I guess who they target or what cases are brought forward? And do they have varying degrees of, respectability amongst the entire international community? Are different countries party to one court but not the other court? How does this all work?
Yes, so there are two completely different institutions. The International Court of Justice is the maximum judicial body of the United Nations and has competence to deal with states' responsibility mainly. So it deals with the violation of international law put in place by states. It's a UN body based in The Hague, and that's the only commonality between the two institutions. The other institution, the International Criminal Court, is not an UN body. It's been created by states in Rome in 1998, and it does not deal with states' responsibility, but with individual criminal responsibility. In other words, it has competence to investigate, prosecute perpetrators of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide, and in part the crime of aggression. So it does not deal with states, but deals with individual. Of course, they are not formally interconnected. They are what the ICJ decides not binding on the ICC, but decisions from one of the two institutions may be very persuasive in relation to the work of the other institution. For instance, when it comes to the crime of genocide, which is under the competence of both the institutions.
So how did you first get involved with this case representing Gaza victims, and how does it work? Obviously, there's there's millions of victims, people that are suffering all varying degrees in Gaza right now. How does the court case work? How did you put it together, and how is it going?
So I started to work on the cases related to the situation in Palestine before the International Criminal Court in early 2020, which is when the former prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, the Gambian lawyer Fatou Bensouda, closed the preliminary investigation. And she said that she had enough evidence to conclude that Israeli authorities had committed war crimes in relation to the military operation in Gaza 2014 Protective Age, in relation to the Great March of Return since 2018, and in relation to the settlements as a war crime in the West Bank, and war crimes committed by Palestinian armed groups in the context of the 2014 war in Gaza. But the prosecutor at the time did not officially open an investigation. She decided to refer two questions to the judges, to the competent trial chamber, asking two simple questions: whether Palestine is or not a state, because that's a necessary condition for the court to proceed, and which is the territory of Palestine. So, as a legal representative of victims at the time, me together with the lawyer from the Gaza Strip, Raji Sourani, who is the director and founder of the Palestinian Center of Human Rights, the oldest human rights organization in Gaza, and Italian colleague Chantal Meloni, we submitted the views of victims in relation to these questions raised by the chamber. And the chamber in February 2020 actually confirmed what the prosecutor was asking, gave positive answer, says that Palestine is a state under the International Criminal Court statute, and also said that territorial jurisdiction means West Bank, including East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip. That's the Palestinian territory under international law. So officially the investigation was opened in March 2021. So before the 7th of October, the International Criminal Court had already enough evidence to argue that war crimes had been committed. Our role as legal representative of victims before the International Criminal Court is to express the views and concerns of victims. So the legal representatives are the voice of victims. Victims don't participate physically directly to the proceedings, but they do through their legal representative. So our role is to bring these views, their voice, every time it's is needed, every time we are asked by the judges. We are in the position to submit evidence before the court in relation to the ongoing cases, which is the investigation is very wide at this stage. We have the possibility as legal representative of victims to do opening and concluding statements, to register the victims so that they are party to the proceedings as well. In relation to your question, where are the cases now? Now the cases are at the stage in which, as everyone knows, the court has issued arrest warrants against Netanyahu and Gallant for war crimes and crimes against humanity, which include, for instance, war crime of starvation. So using starvation as a method of warfare, depriving civilians in Gaza of essential goods. It also includes the war crime of intentional attacks against civilians in the Gaza Strip and the crime against humanity, for instance, of persecution. These are crimes that affect all the people in Gaza, in particular starvation and persecution. And so, as you correctly said, we are talking of a context in which more than 2 million of people are victims of this crime. It's the entire population in Gaza which is victim of these crimes before that are falling within the investigation of the ICC.
In a typical court case, you might have, someone that is prosecuted and then they're found guilty of committing a crime. They get sent to jail, something like this. They have some sort of a measure taken against them. In a court case like this, though, is there any sort of, action that has to be demanded by the courts, by the parties who are guilty? Such as rebuilding Gaza, helping, put an end to this. It seems like when you look at this court case in particular, the arrest warrants, they didn't do that much. Of course, you have Netanyahu and Gallant that can't travel internationally to many countries, but beyond that, is there any sort of action that's demanded by the courts?
Well, yes, that's a very important question. Before looking at this, please let just me conclude in relation to what I was saying before, that I was mentioning the scope of the investigation of the arrest warrants, and as legal representative of victims, we have always said that this scope of the investigation, this decision to issue arrest warrants was a welcome decision, was an historic decision, because for the first time it tries to put an end to impunity that the Israeli authority enjoy, since at least 1948. But at the same time, the scope of this investigation is still too narrow, because it excludes widely documented crimes in the Gaza Strip, but not only, as you said before, that so far are not yet part of the investigation. I'm referring, first of all, to the crime of genocide, without any doubt. In 20 years working in international justice field, I have never seen so much evidence, mainly after Rwanda and Srebrenica, of genocide committed, particularly in light of all the statements provided by the Israeli political and military leaders. I'm referring to the, staying just within the context of the Gaza Strip, to the torture against Palestinian detainees in Gaza, widely documented as well, and the forced displacement of more than 2 million of people, which are all crimes within the jurisdiction of the ICC. Forced displacement is both a war crime and crimes against humanity, and can be also a genocidal act. So as these are widely documented, just to mention some of them, the expectation from us, but from the victims as well, is that the office of the prosecutor is going to widen the scope of the investigation as soon as possible to include these crimes, and of course also not only the crimes but also other individuals. It's very difficult to understand, for instance, why senior officials of the IDF have not been targeted yet by the arrest warrants of the court. This entails the risk of providing indirect legitimacy to the rhetoric that this is the moral army that is just complying orders, and there are just two bad apples in Israel. So the expectations from us is that, the scope is widened, as I said, which means other crimes, but also other individuals affected by the arrest warrants. How the proceedings work, unfortunately, in relation to what you were saying before, this may happen only at the end of the criminal proceedings. In other words, measures may be taken, also reparations, individual or collective, for instance, in Gaza, only in the case in which the criminal proceedings are completed. What does this mean? Only at the stage in which, in this case, Netanyahu and Gallant are found guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of the commission of these crimes. Just to remind everyone, now we are just at the preliminary stage in which there are arrest warrants against them. Which is the problem here? The problem here is that the proceedings before the ICC do not work in absentia. It means that if Netanyahu and Gallant or other potential perpetrators of these crimes in this context are not brought to The Hague, the proceedings stop here and they cannot go on. So they cannot move to the next stage, which is the committing or not to trial, starting the formal trial against these individuals. If this does not happen, we don't get to the end, which is potentially the reparation of victims. Now, victims have the right to express their views, but the right to reparation, as I said, individual or collective, may occur only at the end when the individuals are convicted. In that case, the answer is yes, the court has the power to impose decisions like this, even a reparation in Gaza or in relation to individuals affected by this on the individuals that have been convicted by these crimes. The same applies to the International Court of Justice in relation to the proceedings brought by South Africa against Israel.
Some people might hear that and say, well, that's never going to happen. He's never going to be brought to The Hague. But this has happened with leaders before and generals and, for example, so could this potentially happen? And if it does happen, you're saying, and he's found guilty hypothetically, and Gallant is found guilty, then there'd be some sort of a court order, likely, possibly reparation, something like that.
Yes, the answer is yes. First of all, international justice is quite unpredictable, I would say. Nobody can really say that these arrest warrants are not going to be implemented. There are historical precedents in which the arguments were the same, and then people have been arrested and surrendered to The Hague. What I think the office of the prosecutor should do, particularly as we have also seen on the news, the investigations are still going, to request arrest warrants confidentially. The confidential request of arrest warrants, like in other situations, increases the possibility that these arrest warrants are implemented and individuals are arrested and surrendered to the International Criminal Court. As you said before, we have already seen some effects of these of the arrest warrants. Netanyahu has been unable to carry out all these activities as a prime minister, in particular to travel abroad. Hungary is the only, to the extent of my knowledge, Hungary is the only country that has ratified the Rome Statute, or state part of the ICC, that he has visited. He was supposed to be also at the Vatican a few weeks ago when the new Pope has been appointed, and he renounced because of the high risk to be arrested in Italy. So we can see already some of these effects. So of course, they are not. We would expect more of course, and would expect in particular that these investigations would have a deterrent effect, including also the fact to stop, that's the priority now, the ongoing atrocities. But again, I mean, if they don't move forward, we cannot expect any order by the court, which also includes potential reparations.
Is there a statute of limitations for these crimes? I mean, if Netanyahu's 95 years old and gets surrendered to The Hague, could he still be moved to that second process in the court and try him?
No, statute of limitations not apply to international crimes. Crimes against humanity, genocide, war crimes are so serious that they don't have a limit. So they can be, I mean, it may happen even in 10, 20 years, unless the office of the prosecutor or the judges decide the prosecutor to drop the case, or the judges, any decision may come that, in a different direction. But the answer is no.
Do you expect that they are going to charge other IDF generals, commanders, individuals involved in these crimes? You mentioned that a little bit, that you're surprised that they haven't done that yet. Do you think that's likely?
I mean, the prosecutor himself has always said since the beginning of this investigation, since this investigation became effective, because as I said before, the investigation was in place already, has been in place since March 2021, but it became effective only after October 2023, when the prosecutor visited the Rafah border and started to put in place significant efforts in relation to this investigation. According to his words, that scope of the investigation was not definitive. In other words, that the investigations were going, and he always said that we will go where the evidence leads us. These are literally his words. I mean, I believe the answer to your question is yes, that the scope of the investigation is wider than what we have seen in relation to the arrest warrants. Then they might be, or there may already be other arrest warrants. I mean, The Guardian has published this article in which they say that apparently the judges have ordered the prosecutor this time to submit what we said before, confidential arrest warrants, to avoid all the pressures on the court, to safeguard the investigation, to protect witnesses and victims. And that's very important, I think. So I think that if we follow the reasoning of the prosecutor, that he's going where evidence leads him, the answer is without doubt yes, which means that more arrest warrants in relation to the situation in Gaza, but also in the West Bank. I mean, this idea that the ICC proceedings relate only to the situation in Gaza without undermining the gravity of what's happening in Gaza, of the ongoing genocide in Gaza, but international crimes, war crimes, crimes against humanity are widely documented in the West Bank as well. I mean, first of all, I said it before, settlements is a war crime. Transferring civilians from the occupied territory, from the occupying territory to the occupied one, is clearly a war crime under the statute of the International Criminal Court. And it's maybe the widely documented international crime in all the world, which, I mean, all the evidence is public. You really don't need to go there to collect your evidence, and even the names of the individuals responsible, Israeli officials. So what one would expect on the basis of the evidence is that these arrest warrants would also include, as I said, crimes committed in the West Bank. I mentioned only the settlements, but of course the list is extremely long here, so we can include many other crimes.
You mentioned that The Guardian published an article stating that there may have been confidential arrest warrants submitted. Obviously, we won't know the names of the people if they're confidential arrest warrants, but will there be official confirmation that these confidential warrants have been put out there? Is there any sort of confirmation, notice to the public, anything like that?
No, sorry. The article by The Guardian said that according to their sources, the judges have imposed on the prosecutor to proceed with, if he's going to do it, with the confidential arrest warrants. It doesn't say that the arrest warrants have already been issued. He said that if the prosecutor is going now to submit within this specific investigation in Palestine other arrest warrants, to do it confidentially, to avoid all the pressure and the interference of states. I mean, a number of states, starting from the UK and getting to the US, have intervened in the proceedings, have tried formally to stop these proceedings. To avoid this, the judges have asked the prosecutor, but they don't say whether or not they've been submitted yet.
What sort of pressure have you faced representing Palestinians in these courts, in these cases, going back before October 7th of 2023, even back then, you said back to 2021, I believe. What sort of pressure have you faced? Have you come under attack? Have you been threatened? I'm sure it's a very risky position to put yourself in publicly.
Well, to be honest, not me, not myself. The court itself has been under incredible pressure, political, and now also legal pressure in relation to this investigation. I think that it should be reminded that the relationship between Palestine and the ICC, the state of Palestine and the ICC, started in 2009. So it took 12 years for the court to open an investigation. Why 2009? Because there was the military operation in Gaza, cast-led, and at that stage, the state of Palestine accepted the jurisdiction of the court. If until 2021, there's not been an open investigation, it's mainly for political reason, for the pressure that the court has faced, particularly when the first prosecutor was in place, Luis Moreno Campo, was very reluctant to open an investigation under the US pressure. The institution itself is under incredible pressure, which is threatening the existence of the court itself. I mean, Trump administration has issued sanctions against the court, as it has done previously under the previous administration. And these sanctions are really creating concrete danger for the existence of the court, not only for the investigation in Palestine, but for all the situations in every single context. Because I mean, if the court does not get proper political support by states, these pressures, in particular the sanctions on the court, may really create a concrete danger for the existence of the court in the future.
What sort of potential crimes could be brought against U.S. officials or even the President of the United States when you have so much material support being given still to this day to these entities that have arrest warrants out? They haven't been found guilty yet, but they have arrest warrants. You have financial support, you have military support, and as you just mentioned, you have intervention at the highest level trying to stop these cases and bring down the courts themselves. So could an investigation potentially look in that direction towards U.S. officials, U.K. officials, any officials across the world who are providing high levels of material support to the entities that are being investigated right now?
Well, from a purely legal perspective, the answer is yes. There are different forms of responsibility, which means of involvement in the commission of international crimes before the International Criminal Court. One of these is the commission of crimes. Another one is the facilitating the commission of international crimes, which is aiding and abetting. It's well known also in many common law systems. So facilitating the commission of international crimes. For instance, what you mentioned, the transfer of weapons to Israel, when you have the knowledge that international crimes are being committed in the Gaza Strip, may satisfy this form of responsibility. Why? Because you are still providing weapons, so you are materially facilitating the commission of international crimes, and you are aware that these international crimes are being committed. So the answer is yes, those ones, particularly in the US, but not only, in Germany, in Italy, I'm referring in the UK, the countries that are still supplying weapons to Israel that are being used in the Gaza Strip, they may face individual criminal responsibility for these crimes as for complicity in the commission of international crimes. This could be complicity of individuals taking these decisions, so senior officials to transfer weapons, for instance, but also could entail the responsibility of the states before the International Court of Justice in complicity in the commission of acts of genocide. Now I'm referring to the other proceedings brought by South Africa. And even US officials, as I said, could be brought before the court. They would argue, of course, we have not ratified the Rome Statute, we don't recognize the court, but from a legal perspective, that's completely irrelevant. The court has jurisdiction, in contrast to what the Biden administration said or Trump administration says now, because these crimes are committed on the territory of a state party to the International Criminal Court, on the territory of Palestine, and that's why the court has jurisdiction, independently on the nationality of the perpetrators of these crimes. And this applies also to Israel, of course. Israel has not ratified the ICC, but Israeli nationals can be brought before the ICC because they are committing these crimes on the territory of a state party.
Yeah, that argument never really made sense to me. It's like if you have a foreigner that enters the United States and commits murder in the United States, it doesn't matter if they respect the courts in the United States or think they're legitimate. They're still going to be tried for murder, but I don't know. We'll see what happens. I am extremely grateful for your work, and I think I speak for everyone and my audience, at least, in saying that as well. So thank you so much, Mr. Marniello. And where should people follow along to stay up to date with your work and these cases and everything that is going on that you're so busy with?
Well, I mean, on social media, try to disseminate some information, Twitter, Instagram, but, most of the work is not public. So in particular, I'm referring to the engagement with the court itself. So, of course, that cannot be published.
We'll wait for the big, good news that comes out every so often then, and I'll encourage everyone to check out your Twitter. So thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope to speak again with you very soon.
Thank you very much.